Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favour, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended to thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally by thy mercy attain everlasting life. Amen. I recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for leave to make a statement.
Premier's asked for leave to make a statement. Leave granted. Recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to members of this House. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan is currently experiencing a widespread power outage throughout a significant portion of our province. Crews are currently working to assess the extent of the outage, but what we can confirm is that Boundary Dam, Shand, and Poplar River have all tripped this morning, and the required work is in process for them to be restarted. Additionally, the heavy frost that we have experienced this past week is causing our power lines to fall and to sag and fall, and these lines are quite dangerous. Please be safe and stay at least 10 meters away, and please do not try to remove frost from these lines yourself. Saskatchewan people can have every confidence that Sask Power is doing everything possible and is deploying every possible resource that they have for power to be restored to all parts of the province as soon as possible. However, at this time, Sask Power is unable to provide any estimate of when power will be restored to those areas affected. The power outages currently are affecting large parts of the city of Regina, much of the southeastern portion of the province, extending up the east side of Saskatchewan, wrapping around the city of Saskatoon, but not including the city of Saskatoon at this time. The provincial government has enacted its emergency measures protocol province-wide, and it's working with communities to ensure the safety of all of our Saskatchewan residents. The Ministry of Health is contacting all of our healthcare facilities in the affected area to ensure that our hospitals and our long-term care facilities have sufficient backup generation capacity and that it is functioning. Our Minister of Government Relations is contacting those communities that have been affected to discuss plans for setting up emergency shelters if they are necessary in community facilities with access to power generation. It's important to note the extent of the power outage could grow as the day goes on, and some areas that have had their power restored may experience an outage again later today. So Saskatchewan residents in those affected areas should take the necessary steps to ensure their safety. Never use gas generators or camping stove or barbecues indoors. Keep them in well-ventilated areas, and don't use them to heat your home. Conserve the water that you have and may need. Avoid any unnecessary travel. And if you need assistance, please contact your local municipality. And if you are experiencing an emergency situation, please dial 911 immediately. Also, if your power is on, please make every effort to conserve electricity and prepare for the possibility that you may lose power at a later point today. Sask Power officials and emergency measures, as well as the Fire Commissioner, Dwayne McKay, will be providing further information at a media briefing at 2 p.m. this afternoon. If possible, residents should check Sask Power's website and their social media accounts throughout the day for updates on the outages. Again, I want to emphasize this, that while this is a widespread and very serious situation, Sask Power and the Government of Saskatchewan are taking every possible step to restore power to those affected and to ensure the safety of our Saskatchewan residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome a number of guests seated in your gallery. Today we are joined by Lloyd Zwack, President of the Saskatchewan Professional Firefighters Association, and over 40 firefighters from across the province. They are from Regina, Saskatoon, Prince Albert, Moose Jaw, Swift Current, North Battleford, Yorkton, and Weyburn. Mr. Speaker, firefighters do incredibly important work. They dedicate their lives to protecting our communities. From fighting house fires to responding to medical emergencies, firefighters are here for us when we find ourselves in the most challenging situations. We know that these people put their lives at risk so we can remain safe. Sadly, within the last 2 weeks, we saw a death in the line of duty of a volunteer firefighter near Rosetown. Our thoughts and prayers go out to his family. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that all members join me in thanking these firefighters for everything they do and welcoming them to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the Minister in welcoming these firefighters to their Legislative Assembly. Certainly to say to Lloyd's Walk President and to all the firefighters, thank you very much for the work that you do. Certainly, you know, we all have experience with difficulties in our lives and different problems go on, and usually we're headed that way. And these are men and women that when the trouble is upon us, they head right into it. And we owe them a tremendous debt for that service that they provide for all the people, Mr. Speaker. I just also want to say a word of condolence and congratulations to the firefighters. They have one of the best lobbies going, Mr. Speaker, in terms of advocating for their issues that they come across in their workplace. And certainly one of the people that did a tremendous amount of work on behalf of the firefighters over the years was Jerry Huguet, who's passed away not too long ago. And they inform us that they're going to be renaming the lobby day in honor of Jerry Huguet and all that work that's gone before. So that couldn't have been better chosen, Mr. Speaker. So again, to the men and women, the firefighters here today at their Legislative Assembly, on behalf of the official opposition, thank you for all that you do.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Westview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome a couple of friends of mine from Saskatoon, Sandeep and Gurpratap Kells. Good friends of mine. They came here under the SINP program and have been very good friends and helped out a lot in the community. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask all members to welcome them to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Newtana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Through you and to you, I would like to introduce to the Assembly John and Geraldine Coben, who are here in the West Gallery today from Yorkton. And Mr. Speaker, they've brought a petition concerning the closure of STC and the lack of adequate services as a result of that decision. So I would like everyone to welcome them to their Legislative Assembly.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to rise today to introduce to you and through you to this Assembly my parents, Charles and Susan Mowat, who are seated in your gallery today. It's their first time coming to watch question period. Mom works for a chemical company that primarily deals in water treatment plant operations, and Dad has a home business in accounting, so they both managed to get the day off today to come down to Regina, and I would ask all members to join me in welcoming them to their assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you to all members of the Assembly, I want to join with the member opposite in welcoming the Cobans to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to join with my colleague from Saskatoon Fairview in welcoming her parents here today, the Mowats, Susan and Charles. They might be Vicky's parents, but they're my constituents. And I just want to thank them for all they do to help me be a better MLA. Despite the fact Vicky and I have joint AGMs, the Mowats come out and they actually come to the business portion of my meeting and are very welcome or very happy to share their thoughts about how I could be a better MLA. So I really appreciate that. Actually, they always bring valuable information to the table, Mr. Speaker, and they're one fine MLA's parents. So I'd like to ask everybody to join in welcoming the Mowats to their legislature. But while I'm on my feet, I just want to thank the Saskatchewan Professional Firefighter and Paramedics Association here today for all the work that you do to keep us safe and make sure that like my colleague said, you rush in when everybody else is rushing out, and we owe you a great debt for that. So it's wonderful to see some more female members in the legislature as well. You'll notice that our caucus is almost half women, 6 of 13, and that gender representation really makes a difference, and I'm just thrilled to see more women in the gallery here today in uniform. So thank you and welcome to everybody here today.
Presenting petitions. I recognize the member from Indian Head, Milestone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a privilege to rise today in the House and present a petition on behalf of the vast majority of people in this province who oppose a federally imposed carbon tax, which of course would raise prices on fuel and most everything else in this province. I think we're very seeing the evidence of what a carbon tax does in France and the protests that are going on there. Mr. Speaker, we're much quieter, I guess, in this province where we just present petitions and don't burn down buildings, Mr. Speaker. But a carbon tax would have a devastating effect in this province, Mr. Speaker, and I would think that all parties should join together and oppose it. Unfortunately, there's only one party in this province that does. Mr. Speaker, the prayer reads as follows. We in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following actions to cause the Government of Saskatchewan to take the necessary steps to stop the federal government from imposing a carbon tax on this province. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed from the great people in Battleford, Mayfair, North Battleford, Medstead, Landis and Glasgow. I so present.
I recognize the member for Cumberland.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a petition in support of a dialysis treatment in the North. Mr. Speaker, dialysis patients in the North face real hardship because of the travel, that they have to travel to access treatment. Some are forced to spend 35 to 40 hours a week just to get care they need. This can also be very difficult for elders in our communities. It also impacts those who are too weak following treatment to travel these far distances. And the prayer reads, we in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Government of Saskatchewan build a dialysis centre in the North so that Northerners can have treatment closer to home and not have to spend so much time and money on travelling. It is signed and supported by many good people of the North. I so present.
I recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise once again today to present petitions on behalf of concerned citizens and businesses all across Saskatchewan as it relates to the hike and expansion of the PST onto construction labour. Mr. Speaker, of course, this has hiked the cost of living, the costs of products across our province. Mr. Speaker, it's the epitome of a job-killing tax, Mr. Speaker, at a time where we need nothing more than job creation and investment across our province. We've witnessed the devastation on this front, many companies that have been directly impacted in a real negative way, Mr. Speaker. The loss of jobs by the thousands across our province, many workers that have had to leave our province, Mr. Speaker, and the fact that permits are down all across Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. The prayer reads as follows. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to stop saddling families and businesses with the costs of their mismanagement and immediately reinstate the PST exemption on construction and stop hurting Saskatchewan businesses and families. These petitions today are signed by concerned residents of Weyburn. I so submit.
I recognize the member for Saskatoon, Newtana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising today to present a petition calling for the restoration of public intermunicipal transportation for persons with disabilities. The people who signed this petition would like to bring to our attention the following. The cruel and heartless Sask Party budget of 2017 cut public intermunicipal transportation services for persons with disabilities, including all people with various abilities. This decision has left persons with disabilities stranded and isolated in both urban and rural communities. That since cutting transportation services for persons with disabilities, the Sask Party has failed to replace this service in any meaningful way. And by cutting STC, the Sask Party is failing to honour their commitment to make Saskatchewan the best place in Canada for persons with disabilities. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Government of Saskatchewan immediately restore public intermunicipal transportation services for persons with disabilities. The individuals that have signed this petition today, Mr. Speaker, come from the City of Regina. I so submit.
I recognize the member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition to get big money out of Saskatchewan politics. And, Mr. Speaker, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan want to bring to our attention the following.
You're the government.
That we know
change the law.
That Saskatchewan Outdated Election Act allows corporations and unions and individuals, even those living outside the province, to make unlimited donations to our province's political parties. But, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the people of Saskatchewan deserve to live in a fair province where all voices are equal and money can't influence politics. But, Mr. Speaker, over the past 10 years, the Sask Party has received $12.61 million in corporate donations, and of that, $2.87 million have come from companies outside Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan politics should belong to Saskatchewan people, and we know the federal government and the provinces of Alberta, Manitoba, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and now British Columbia have moved to limit this influence and level the playing field by banning corporate and union donation to political parties. And Mr. Speaker, we know the Sask Party has been in power for over 10 years and have done nothing in this area. Mr. Speaker, I like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the government of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party to overhaul Saskatchewan's campaign finance laws, to end out-of-province donations, to put a ban on donations from corporations and unions, and to put a donation limit on individual donations. Mr. Speaker, the people signing this petition come from Southey, Francis, and Remore. I do so present. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling for pharmacare for Saskatchewan. These citizens wish to bring to our attention that Canada is the only country with a universal healthcare system that doesn't include prescription drug coverage, and this oversight results in unnecessary illness and suffering and costs us billions. That over 90% of Canadians agree that we need a national pharmacare program, which makes sense as 1 in 5 Canadians don't fill necessary prescriptions because the medications cost too much. And that when we cover essential medications, we improve people's quality of life and save millions in downstream costs. I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to immediately support the establishment of universal pharmacare for Saskatchewan people and advocate for national pharmacare for all Canadians. This particular petition is signed by individuals from Marquess and Moose Jaw. Mr. Speaker, I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions. Statements by members. I recognize the member for Cypress Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to announce in the House today that the town of East End and the RM of White Valley number 49 were recognized for their tourism campaign, Discover the Sanctuary for Your Senses, Discover East End, Saskatchewan. They received this award during the 2018 Saskatchewan Municipal Awards in the Regional Cooperation category. As the town and the RM worked very closely to make this campaign a success. The Saskatchewan Municipal Awards celebrated innovative practices of our province's municipal governments, recognizing the excellence and innovation within their communities. Mr. Speaker, this is not the first award for the campaign, as earlier this year they were awarded CETA Marketing Innovation Award. Rosa Van Quaza Ring, who is the Tourism Economic Development Officer for the town of East End, has been working very hard all year round on this campaign. She had one goal in mind, as she stated, quote, basically what we wanted to do was to increase the awareness of East End as a must-see tourism destination that will attract visitors and generate new revenue streams to support our local businesses, end of quote. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will that after these well-deserved recognition, Rosa will be seeing many new visitors taking in the great sights of East End and White Valley. Now I ask all the members, please join me in congratulating the town and the RM on their well-deserved recognition. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In July, I traveled to Spokane, Washington, along with several members opposite to attend the 28th Annual Summit of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region on behalf of the opposition. It was a full and engaging 5-day summit with attendees from Canada and the United States. There were over 60 state, provincial, and territorial legislators in attendance, as well as members of the private sector, NGOs, and academics. Throughout the course of the summit, I had the opportunity to participate in several different presentations and working group sessions. I attended keynote sessions along with presentations on trade, carbon policy, border issues, cross-border livestock health, technical innovation, workforce development, and economic development. Mr. Speaker, the conference was packed with a myriad of topics and a full schedule. I appreciated the opportunity to engage with fellow legislators on important cross-border issues and to learn from best practices elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the organizers of this summit for giving so many people the opportunity to come together and discuss these important issues. I ask all members to do the same and to acknowledge the work that is going on in planning Penwar in Saskatoon for this upcoming summer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Lloyd Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I wish to share with my colleagues the recent accomplishments of two young athletes from my constituency. Rachel and Naomi Brand are sisters from Lloydminster and recently competed in the World Karate Commission WKC Championships in Dublin, Ireland. Mr. Speaker, both girls earned the chance to compete for the Team Canada contingent at the World Championships thanks to placing top 2 at the WKC Canadian Finals last May. Rachel, age 12, and her sister Naomi, age 10, dedicated half their summer to training with their coach, Eliza Ma, at the Lloydminster Art of Taekwondo and Kung Fu Club to prepare for the championships. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that all their hard work and dedication paid off. Rachel earned a first-place finish in the Kung Fu hand forms age 11 to 12 division, besting the 14 other international competitors, while her sister Naomi brought home a silver medal in the 10 and under category. Mr. Speaker, these are impressive accomplishments on their own, but what makes the sisters' victories even more impressive is that they only hold blue belts, while the majority of their competition wore black. Mr. Speaker, we may just have some future Olympic athletes in the making here. I ask all members to join me in congratulating Rachel and Naomi Brand on their impressive performances at the WKC Championships. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Cumberland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation hosted the annual Woodland Cree Gathering August 4th to the 15th this past summer in Pelican Narrows. The theme for this year's gathering was the empowering our traditions and cultural practices. I was fortunate to bring greetings at their opening ceremony on August the 7th in front of many community members. There, we were joined by many delegates, including chiefs from the PAGC, FSIN, as well as mayors and councillors from the nearby municipalities of Creighton, Denair Beach, and Flin Flon. The gathering featured many amazing events, including a walleye fish derby, canoe races, singing and jigging competitions, golf, and a slow pitch tournament. The amazing cultural food, the shack tents with arts and crafts. The event concluded with a showcase by country music singer Charlie Major and a youth leadership conference. I would like to congratulate the leadership, committee members from Pelican Narrows on a great job hosting this year's Woodland Cree Gathering. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Moose Jaw North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I extend congratulations to the Vanier Vikings 4A boys volleyball team in my constituency for winning the provincial championship. Mr. Speaker, just 4 days after winning the Moose Jaw League championship, the Vikings took on the Osler VCA for the provincial gold medal. It was not an easy task, as Osler VCA had previously beat Vanier in the final round-robin game. This made for a very exciting gold medal match. The Vikings started out strong with a 25-16 win in the first set. However, Osler struck back, taking the second set by a similar score, which would take the game to the third and deciding set. Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, in the sport of volleyball, the deciding set only goes up to 15 points, making this game much more high stakes. I'm proud to say that the Vikings were victorious, winning the third set 15-13, bringing cheers of celebration from those in attendance. That's probably how a championship game should be won, close and exciting. Mr. Speaker, this is the first ever provincial volleyball championship for Vanier Collegiate and just the 4th boys title won by Moose Jaw High School. I ask all members to join me in congratulating the Vanier Collegiate Vikings on a successful season and their first provincial championship. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Here. Recognize the member for Saskatoon, Churchill, Wildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I presented the Premier Service Club Awards to members of the Rotary Clubs of Saskatoon. Service clubs such as the Rotary Club dedicate time and resources to bettering communities in our province. Mr. Speaker, the extensive work done by Rotary clubs with the eradication of polio worldwide, Habitat for Humanity, and Shelter Box have made them true leaders in the global community. One particular program that has made a huge impact for families and youth in Saskatoon is the Restorative Action Program, which is an initiative created and governed by Rotary clubs. This program is in 8 schools and provides high school students with positive alternatives when dealing with conflict in their lives. Since being implemented, there has been a significant decrease in physical altercations in those schools. Mr. Speaker, congratulations to the individuals who received a Premier Service Club Award. Paul Gauthier, Rotary Club of Saskatoon. Ron Lupke and Tom Geenan, co-presidents, Rotary Club of Saskatoon-Meewasin. Brenda Banbury, President, Rotary Club of Saskatoon North. Stan Garchinsky, President, Rotary Club of Saskatoon-Nutana, and Alvin Ulrich, President, Rotary Club of Saskatoon-Riversdale. Mr. Speaker, I now ask that all members please join me in congratulating this year's Premier Service Club recipients and thank them for their dedication and service to their community and the province of Saskatchewan. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Melfort.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is a great day for the people of Saskatchewan. This morning, our government announced that it will renew its agreement with the Shock Trauma Air Rescue Service, otherwise known as STARS, until 2030. Our government will continue to cover about half of the STARS total operating costs each year in the province. And Mr. Speaker, our government has also committed $13 million to purchase one of the 3 new H-145 helicopters for use in Saskatchewan as part of STARS' initiative to renew its fleet across the prairie provinces. The first helicopter will arrive in Saskatchewan in 2019, with others being purchased under STARS' renewal plan by 2023. These new aircrafts will ensure reliable service to all of us for decades to come. Mr. Speaker, a major corporate sponsor, Nutrien, also stepped forward to announce its continued support for STARS in Saskatchewan by committing to another helicopter as well, Mr. Speaker, $13 million. STARS has announced that it will be reaching out to new donors as well for funding a 3rd helicopter to serve the Saskatchewan residents. Mr. Speaker, STARS has become an integral part of the emergency medical service in our province, and today's announcement shows commitment to support them as they support us in our greatest times of need. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank everyone who helped make this day possible, and to those who put their lives on the line to be there for us when we need them most. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Corruption in government doesn't start out with glaring crimes, with big bribes or rigged elections. It starts with the little things. It starts with the unwillingness to tell the whole truth, with a culture of defensiveness and a belief that those in power can do no wrong. That's the gnawing concern with this government, the consistent unwillingness to come clean and reveal what's gone on when suspicions arise on e-health, on carbon capture, on the bypass, and for years now on the GTH. Bill Boyd's justification that the infamous hurried purchase of the east parcels of the GTH was necessary because of commitments the government had made to Loblaws to build interchanges, well, we learned this morning that justification just wasn't true. We've now learned that none of the contracts that were obtained by the media make reference to any such commitments to build interchanges for free flow access to Loblaws at the GTH. So my question for the Premier is, what was the real reason for rushing through those purchases, and will he release the contracts with Loblaws so that Saskatchewan people will finally know exactly what this government got us into?
I recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, free flow access is a key element of any successful inland port. It's not a feature that's intended for any single GTH client. It's intended for the interconnectivity of everyone that is in the facility. Mr. Speaker, it eases congestion, but most importantly, it's about safety. It's how vehicles are moved in and out in a safe and effective manner. And Mr. Speaker, at the GTH, over 4,800 trucks a week come safely in and out on the free flow access. Mr. Speaker, Loblaws wanted it, GTH provided it, and I think we should all be glad that it's there.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that answer is contrary to what the past minister had said was the justification for rushing through the GTH land deals that wasted public dollars and made Sask Party donors millions of dollars. But instead of taking ownership and clearing the air, this is a government that likes to shift the story, to hide behind ambiguous language, behind the public service, behind commercial sensitivity, all to avoid admitting that they've made a mistake. The justification for this deal isn't backed up by the evidence. Evidence from contracts that this government refuses to fully release, leaving Saskatchewan people and potential GTH investors no option but to conclude that this government continues to have something to hide. Even the Canadian Taxpayers Federation wants to know, why did we have to get her done and what happened to the money? Mr. Speaker, it's long past time this government did the right thing and held a judicial inquiry. The Premier has revealed no viable plan to extract us from this Sask Party-made mess. Will he clear the air? Call a judicial inquiry into the land deals at the GTH and get to the bottom of what Bill Boyd and this Premier's cabinet colleagues got us into.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, every day they come up with something new or something different. Today, they're complaining that there's free flow access in and out of the GTH. I'm glad that there wasn't, because if there wasn't that free flow access, those members opposite would be standing in their place saying, you didn't build it right, you didn't make it safe, the trucks can't get out, you're going to have an accident. Well, Mr. Speaker, literally thousands of trucks a week go in and out of that facility safely. They drop off their goods, they reload their goods, they move in and out safely exactly as they want to. There's a transportation hub in Calgary. It's got stoplights coming in. They have accidents. They have congestion. They have backup. We don't have that problem here because it was built properly and appropriately. Mr. Speaker, that's what our job was when that facility was built. That's the way it was built. And Mr. Speaker, the members opposite should say thank you to the people that built it, the people that designed it, and they should also thank Loblaws for the people that they employ there. Nearly 1,000 going in and out of there every day. They go in and out on free flow buses.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon-Newtana.
Mr. Speaker, it isn't just the land flipping at the east parcels that was impacted by Bill Boyd's so-called commitment to establish free flow access to the GTH. Not only is Loblaws' wish to not have their truck stop appear to be absent from the contract, it drove a massive expansion in the scope of the West Regina bypass. What began as a straight line from Highway 11 down to Highway 1 now includes 4 additional massive interchanges, including the Dudney and Rotary interchanges, to specifically ensure the free flow access Boyd just promised these companies. So to the Minister of Highways, exactly how much more did we pay for these interchanges on the revised West Regina bypass to support business interests at the GTH?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, 88 times the member from Regina Rosemont stood in his place and presented a petition to get the trucks off of Dudney. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite complained that the Regina bypass changed in scope, that it was larger, that it went all the way around Regina, that it had interchanges on it. Mr. Speaker, there's no surprise.
Order, please. Can't hear the question. Can't imagine that you can either. Recognize the Minister.
There's no surprise. There's nothing hidden. Drive by it and have a look. That's what we want to have. That's what the entire Regina bypass highway system is like. The members' office will soon get to drive down it. They will have a look at it and they will see there's safe exits, safe entrances. That's the way those things work. There's nothing magic. There's nothing new. They've existed since Dwight Eisenhower built the freeway system in 1954.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon-Newtana.
And I'm sure that minister remembers that well, Mr. Speaker. Wrong minister, no answers, Mr. Speaker. This government's actions make the best case for a judicial inquiry with their relentless efforts to deny Saskatchewan people the answers they deserve.
That's right.
Here's what we know. Before Boyd recklessly scrambled to acquire these parcels to house the GTH's massive interchanges, the West Bypass project was pegged at $160 million. That was for only 2 interchanges. And now, Mr. Speaker, there are 6 hugely expensive interchanges on the West Bypass, and it is unclear why. The contract with Loblaws was silent. Bill Boyd claimed he had made a commitment, but there's no paper trail. And we know the GTH has overpromised and underdelivered, and this government is looking to get out of the business entirely. Again, to the Minister of Highways, how much extra did we tack on the West Bypass tab for Boyd's failed field of weeds out at the GTH?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, it came as a great surprise to the members opposite when the entire Regina bypass project increased its scope so that it went all the way around. There was a number of interchanges added so there would be easy access on and off across the entire, from Balcony all the way out west of Regina. And Mr. Speaker, I'd say this to the member from Regina Rosemont. You don't want those things there? You stand up and you tell the people which one you don't want. You want to move those trucks back to Dudney? Why don't you stand up and campaign on the idea you're going to close it? Because, Mr. Speaker, they're not going to want to do it. They know it's a good project and they're happy with it.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, we know eHealth conducted 2 external investigations into employee conduct and reviewed whether contracts had been tainted by vendor-sponsored travel taken by employees who were signing the deals. The minister assured us that findings weren't criminal in nature, but refused to send the reports to the RCMP for review, an option presented by the former CEO and Deputy Minister of Health. Concerned public servants have told us the Board of Directors at eHealth recommended the reports were to be made public and reviewed by the RCMP, but government intervened. Can the minister tell this House what the consensus of the Board of Directors of eHealth was and what the recommendations were on this matter?
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said many times, when I was made aware of this situation, I was told that the issue with the employees at question, Mr. Speaker, was that outside legal firms were consulted with. They did a report for the board, Mr. Speaker. The employees were dismissed, even though, as the member said, the legal advice was that it wasn't criminal in nature. That's my understanding, Mr. Speaker, of why the Board of Directors did not turn the reports over to the police. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As a member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, that's not an answer. There are valid reasons to get additional oversight on this file. If the minister is getting even half the calls we are on this issue, he would know there are many unanswered questions and a crisis of confidence in the organization from the civil service and the public. Not releasing vendor-sponsored travel records, hiding the external investigations from the public, and now refusing to refer the issue to the RCMP is only making things worse. This organization is in the process of taking on an unprecedented amalgamation of IT services for the provincial health region, and Saskatchewan people have the right to know what has gone on and to have faith in eHealth's ability to manage the task. Will the minister do the right thing and commit to referring the file to the RCMP today?
I recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, there's a number of points in that question. I'll attempt to touch on them all. First, on the vendor-sponsored travel, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Minister to the Premier is looking into the matter and will be reporting back in due course, Mr. Speaker. As I said earlier on the matter of the report and why it wasn't turned over to the police, I've been informed that the information from the legal advice that the board got was that it wasn't criminal in nature. That's why it wasn't turned over. But, Mr. Speaker, if the members know something we do, the provincial auditor is looking into this matter. Her office has been informed right from the start on this. If she has any concerns, we're going to take that very seriously, Mr. Speaker. And if the members opposite are getting all these phone calls they talk about and have all this information, I suggest they turn them over either to us or to the appropriate authorities so it can be dealt with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognized the member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, the Sask Party government seems only barely capable of managing the pressures of our education system when times are good. But now that resource prices have fallen, it's our teachers and students who are paying the price. Mr. Speaker, the situation at Ecole St. Pius X is a prime example. Parents, teachers, and the board have been raising concerns for years due to failing infrastructure, overcrowding, and unsafe classroom conditions at the school. The parents of the school recently sent 259 letters to the minister calling for the minister to make their safety and education a priority and allocate money towards an immediate rebuild of St. Pius. What does the minister have to say to the families joining us here today in the West Gallery who simply want a safe environment for their children to learn in?
Hear, hear. I recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd like to welcome the parents and the children who are here in the Assembly today to present with respect to their school, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, safety of our children and the teachers in their classroom is of utmost priority to us. We understand the issues that are happening on St. Pius, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you that the Regina Catholic School Division continues to assess this property, Mr. Speaker. We had an engineer's report in 2017, Mr. Speaker, addressing a number of concerns. Nothing structural, Mr. Speaker. There's a safety audit that's done with respect to this building every 6 months, Mr. Speaker. The last safety audit that we got indicated there was no safety issues. But, Mr. Speaker, we understand the need for a new facility in this area. The Catholic School Board has since refiled a request for a capital project, Mr. Speaker, a joint project with the Regina Public School Board, Mr. Speaker, for a joint facility. We're going to assess that. The member opposite, who's a former school board trustee, understands how this works. These applications are made, they're assessed by the Ministry of Education, Mr. Speaker, and set in a priority list. And as we get through that priority list, Mr. Speaker, these decisions will be made as we move through our budget development process in the spring, Mr. Speaker. But certainly, we understand the urgency for a need of the school in this area, Mr. Speaker, and we'll address it in the ordinary course.
Recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, I want to read an excerpt from the letter that the minister received from these concerned parents. Quote, "Our children attend school in a building that lacks a sprinkler system and has major failures in load-bearing walls, including cracking, moving, and buckling of support walls. Mold and asbestos are present throughout the facility. In addition, St. Pius is not wheelchair accessible. This level of infrastructure failure would be unacceptable in any other government building. It is intolerable for a school where hundreds of young children spend the bulk of their days." End quote. Mr. Speaker, these are very serious concerns from parents, and they would not be here with us today if that wasn't the case. Does the minister find these school conditions acceptable?
I recognize the Minister of Education.
Speaker, I've indicated, Mr. Speaker, that the assessment of this school in terms of replacement will be done in the ordinary course as we move through our assessment, Mr. Speaker. But while the member is quoting Mr. Speaker, here's from the Director of Education of the Catholic School Board, Mr. Speaker, that the building's safe for students and staff to attend in a learning environment in the condition of the school as it currently is. They test it regularly to make sure the safety standards are up to scratch and they don't have any concerns. That's not to say, Mr. Speaker, that the school doesn't need to be replaced. We recognize that. And it will be assessed in the normal course as we go through our capital project review, Mr. Speaker. As I've said, the Catholic School Board has resubmitted this request. It will be considered by the Ministry of Education in terms of where we're at in the priority list. But again, we understand that, Mr. Speaker. But never let it be said, Mr. Speaker, that this government ignores the capital requirements, especially here in Regina, Mr. Speaker. We've done 10 schools, Mr. Speaker. In addition to all the other capital projects that we've done across the province since we've been in government. But here's a number of lists, Mr. Speaker. Ecole St. Elizabeth, St. Kateri, Sacred Heart, Arcole, Douglas Park, Ecole Canad, Ecole Wascana, Ecole Harper Landing, Scott Collegiate, and Seven Stones, Mr. Speaker. Certainly a commitment on this government when it comes to capital, especially in this city.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon-Newtana.
Mr. Speaker, today we're joined by John and Geraldine Coben, who have come here today from Yorkton. They've made their way to the Assembly to share their concerns with this government's decision to shut down and sell off the STC. They're concerned that the companies that have set up in the Yorkton area since the shutdown don't offer the same level of service, and they aren't as well equipped to transport people with disabilities. More than 900 people from many communities in that area have signed on to their petition calling on this government to reverse the damaging decision, and I will send them to the minister right after question period. Will the Minister for CIC listen to their concerns, or will he at least admit that scrapping the STC was a mistake?
I recognize the Minister for Crown Investments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to meet with those individuals after question period, as I am with anybody, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must note, though, members opposite, that they criticize the wind down of STC at a time when the subsidy per ride was $94. Yet, while they were in government, Mr. Speaker, they shut down many routes. And that's when the subsidy was only at $6 per ride. That's only $6 per ride, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the people living in those communities, like Archwell, Rose Valley, Wadena, Radville, Mankota, Bengoff, Trampling Lake, whatever, Mr. Speaker, to those people, Mr. Speaker, effectively the NDP, Mr. Speaker, wound down SDC, effective for those people, Mr. Speaker.
That was okay.
Mr. Speaker, that party then, Mr. Speaker, left those ones without a ride to see loved ones,
That's $6.
without a ride, Mr. Speaker, to get to appointments, Mr. Speaker. And that's when the subsidy was at $6.
We didn't have any.
We operated that company until the subsidy was $94 per ride, Mr. Speaker.
They're all gone.
Thank you. That was unsustainable.
Here, here.
As a member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Advanced Education describe the process for vetting a person who is being considered for a position on the board of one of our institutions of higher learning? What kind of checks are in place to ensure that people appointed to the boards of our colleges are of good character and are acceptable to their community?
Recognize the Minister of Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'm unclear about the question that's being asked by the member opposite. It seems to call into question the appointment process to boards of our institutions, all of which are functioning, I think, extremely well. There is a process in place where there's a skills matrix that is looked at by the Board of Governors. There are also names put forward by various individuals in the community. All of the board appointments that are made with a view to the skills matrix, the diversity component, and so on of each of our institutions, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure that I want to get into the specifics on the floor of the Assembly. Thanks.
Recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, on November 1st of this year, the government approved an order in council appointing Vince Nadamagan to the Board of Directors of Northlands College. Strangely, his name doesn't appear on the online summary of the order in council available on the government's website, nor in news media reports. 3 weeks ago, on November the 19th, Vince Nadamagan pleaded guilty to domestic assault. Charges of uttering death threats were stayed. We have the highest rates of domestic violence in the country, Mr. Speaker. How did the Minister of Advanced Education miss this before approving the appointment, and what message does this send to domestic violence survivors in our province?
Recognize the Minister of Advanced Education.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. I was not aware of this issue. This is the first I've heard of this issue, and of course we'll be looking into it immediately. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Nadamagan is no stranger to the Saskatchewan Party. He sought the nomination to be the Sask Party candidate in the 2016 election and withdrew at the midnight hour the day before his nomination meeting. We know that part of the vetting process he would have had to submit a criminal record check to be eligible for that nomination. And what would that record show? These are only some of the convictions, Mr. Speaker. 1989, assault. 1994, assault. 1995, assault and theft. 1995, assault causing bodily harm for which he served 8 months. 1995, assault. 2001, assault. 2002, assault. 2004, 2 counts of assault. 2009, assault. This was not a one-off, Mr. Speaker. This is someone who has a serious history of violence, including domestic violence.
Can the minister explain the complete failure in governance that led to Mr. Natamagan being appointed to the board of Northlands?
We'll take a moment we'll take some time to think about this, but you're on a line here, member. You know full well. Recognize Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, these appointments are order in council appointments, which means not only does the minister... No, I'm not arguing. This is my question. Thank you very much. This is my question. These are order in council appointments, which means the minister was aware when she signed who she signed it for. The premier signs the order in council appointments as well. It's a cabinet decision, something for which the members opposite are fully responsible. So my question for the premier is, what did he know prior to that order in council about Mr. Natamagan's past history, and to what degree was he aware of the way that this information was not shared? This information was on the written order in council, but not online, not in the press stories about the appointees. So my question for the premier is, what did he know about the past and the degree to which this wasn't shared, and how does he defend putting someone with such a history in a position of authority at one of Saskatchewan's colleges?
Recognize Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the minister indicated that she was not aware of this. Mr. Speaker, the minister indicated that she was going to look into it immediately. That's the correct answer on this. Mr. Speaker, the issue that's being raised is largely a party issue. None of us will have any comment on an issue that's before the party. But, Mr. Speaker, you can rest assured that the minister will follow through and will make sure that everything appropriate has taken place with regard to this and every other appointment, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly what the intention of this side of the House is to maintain the utmost in integrity on all of the appointments. There's a vetting process that takes place, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to go and do that process and make sure that we do exactly the right thing whenever it takes place. If there's misconduct on the part of an appointee later on, Mr. Speaker, it's the intention of people on this side of the House to deal with it.
Recognize Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the connection to the party is not the question. The connection to the party may be...
I remind the member, we've got an answer here. They're going to look into it. It's time to move on. Next question. Recognize Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is simply this: how did this happen, and to what degree was the Premier and the Minister aware of the individual's history prior to making that appointment?
Recognize Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister answered the question earlier. She indicated that she wasn't aware of the situation. She indicated that she was going to look into it. She also indicated that she was going to do it forthwith. Mr. Speaker, that's about as full and complete an answer as you could possibly want on the subject. And Mr. Speaker, integrity on this side of the House is something that is absolutely imperative for everyone here and should be for all of the members in the House. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to urge the members opposite, if they've got an issue with somebody, bring it forward, raise it, rather than bring it forward on the floor of the Assembly. If there's a problem or there's an issue that's there. So anyway, Mr. Speaker, that's the direction that we're taking on this side of the House.
Recognize the member for John Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, in years previous, this is a government that oversaw a bit of a debacle at St. Peter's and Carleton Trail Regional College. In the wake of that, they plowed a tremendous amount of money into governance training and governance work on the part of the sector. This has happened after that, Mr. Speaker. So our question stands: how can this go on, Mr. Speaker?
Recognize the Minister of Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, I would say again that I am deeply concerned about this. This is the first time that I have heard about this issue. I can encourage the member from Riversdale doesn't want to hear the answer, Mr. Speaker, on this very, very serious matter. I am appalled at hearing this. I assure the members opposite and the members on my side of the House that this will be looked into immediately and remedied immediately as well. There is absolutely zero tolerance for this, Mr. Speaker, and we will be handling it. Thank you very much.
Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills.
Item number 1, Honourable Mr. Morgan.
I recognize the Minister of Justice.
I move that Bill number 164, the Statute Law Amendment Act 2018, number 3, be now introduced and read a first time.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 164 be now read and introduced a first time. Pleasure Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
First reading of this bill.
When shall this bill be read a second time? Recognize the Minister.
Next sitting of the Assembly.
Next sitting.
Item number 2, Honourable Mr. Morgan.
Recognize Minister of Justice.
It's my privilege to move that Bill number 165, the Workers' Compensation Amendment Act 2018, be now introduced and read a first time.
Moved by the Minister that Bill number 165 be now introduced and read a first time. Is the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
First reading of this bill.
When shall this bill be read a second time? Recognize the Minister.
Next sitting of the Assembly, Mr. Speaker.
Next sitting. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Orders of the day.
Written questions. Question number 31, asked by Ms. Chartier.
Recognize the Deputy Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to order the answers to questions 31 and 32.
Ordered. 31, 32.
Second readings, item number 1, Bill number 163, the Legal Professions Amendment Act 2018. Honourable Mr. Burkich.
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to move second reading of the Legal Profession Amendment Act 2018. Mr. Speaker, this legislation amends the Legal Profession Act 1990 to implement the recommendations of the Legal Services Task Team and to make a series of other administrative improvements. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, the Legal Services Task Team was appointed and included representatives from a number of legal organizations. The role of the task team was to examine whether service providers other than lawyers should be permitted to provide some legal services in Saskatchewan. The task team conducted extensive public consultations when preparing the recommendations in the final report, including with judges, lawyers, community organizations, legal associations, and government officials. The task team also conducted an online public survey and held public town hall meetings in both Saskatoon and Regina. Mr. Speaker, the changes based on the task team recommendations are aimed at increasing access to justice by providing innovative new ways to access legal services. Mr. Speaker, the amendments will authorize the Law Society to issue limited licenses on a case-by-case basis to non-lawyers. The requirement to be issued a limited license will be set out in the Law Society rules, and there is also authority for the government to make regulations setting licensing requirements for these new alternative legal services providers. Mr. Speaker, the amendments will also confirm that any person can provide general legal information to any other person without a license. The list of exceptions to the current prohibition against the unauthorized practice of law will also be expanded, which will allow more non-lawyers to perform their job duties without concern that they are violating the Act. Mr. Speaker, several other amendments are proposed to update the Act to better reflect actual practices and to improve the administration of the Law Society. Several provisions respecting committee processes will be moved from the Act to the Law Society rules. A new option to appoint benchers will also be added, and the minimum number of benchers will be reduced from 17 to 12. These changes are aimed at increasing efficiency and ensuring that bencher representation is responsive to changes in the profession. Mr. Speaker, this bill is an important step in what likely will be a multi-year process of developing requirements for non-lawyer members and educating the public about these new ways to access legal services. Mr. Speaker, Ontario has already established an established paralegal program, and British Columbia is in the process of establishing a licensed paralegal program. With these changes, Saskatchewan will be one of the leaders in this new area of the regulation of alternative legal service providers and will be at the forefront of this important access to justice initiative. Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to move second reading of the Legal Profession Amendment Act 2018.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 163 be now read a second time. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Recognize the member for Saskatoon-Nutana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to rise to enter into the debate today for Bill number 163, the Act to amend the Legal Profession Act 1990 and to make a consequential amendment to the Notaries Public Act. I certainly recall the days when I was a student at law making appearances in court as part of my articling, and there was definitely limits to what I could do, Mr. Speaker. And obviously, as a student at law, I didn't have the necessary experience to appear in court as a practicing lawyer, but there was definitely plenty of opportunities through the articling process to gain that experience under the supervision of a qualified lawyer and with a principal who was in charge of my articles, Mr. Speaker. I also had the good fortune to act as a principal a few years later for a young lawyer named Jamie Hammersmith. His dad is no stranger to this assembly, Jerry Hammersmith, and Jamie was a fabulous young lawyer, worked really hard, and unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, way too soon, leaving a young family. But having that experience of being a principal and working with a student at law was an invaluable one to me as a lawyer, and I still have the dream catcher that he gave me hanging in my office in Saskatoon, Mr. Speaker, because that is a great memory of a wonderful young lawyer that left us too soon. In terms of the Act, there is some talk here about issuing a limited license to engage in limited practice of law, Mr. Speaker. And I know there's many frustrations with paralegals and legal secretaries who have worked in the field for decades in some cases, who have considerable knowledge and experience about the practice of law, but they don't have the certification or I guess this is being changed now to license under this Act, to perform certain actions which only a lawyer is able to do. And I would think that probably extends to the engineering profession and the medical profession, where they too have very experienced staff working for them who understand many of the requirements for the work of the engineer, or the work of the doctor, or the work of many other professionals, Mr. Speaker. So I'm not sure if this is the beginning of creating limited practice licenses for all the professions in Saskatchewan. Obviously, the task force and the team that worked together on this felt it was important, but I would be interested to know whether that's something that's going to be extended to other professions in the province. So for medicine, for example, if you were going to give a limited license to practice medicine and only provide information, what kind of information would that be? And if I understand correctly, the eligibility for the limited licensee is found in Section 24 of the proposed new Section 24.1. And this is saying that the Law Society of Saskatchewan can issue a limited license to engage in the limited practice of law to someone who doesn't meet the student law requirements, that have complied with the rules and regulations with respect to the application for the license. We don't know what those regulations and rules are at this point, and then would agree to practice in accordance with the conditions and restrictions specified on the limited license. And then now what it's doing is allowing the benchers, those are the people that are elected by the legal profession, to admit lawyers, Mr. Speaker, to practice law in the province of Saskatchewan. And so it's up to the benchers to make the rules in terms of eligibility for these limited licensees, fees, insurance, terms and conditions, and eligibility to vote at the benchers' elections, and competency and discipline provisions that would apply. So there seems to be a lot of questions, Mr. Speaker, about exactly what this is going to look like. I know the minister indicated that this is going to be an ongoing process, and that these changes are just the beginning of this process. But I think there are a lot of questions that will come out of this, and you know, you may think that you're giving legal information on perhaps preparing a will for yourself, Mr. Speaker, or your elderly parents are considering making a will. It may appear to be straightforward, and maybe that's they are given legal information by somebody with a limited license, and then if things go wrong, where does it get fixed, Mr. Speaker, and who would be responsible? I would think the Law Society of Saskatchewan would carry a lot of the responsibility for this. The minister referred to a report that came out in August of 2018 that was a joint report including many senior lawyers, and I see also paralegals, including a paralegal that I know very well in Saskatoon, Mr. Speaker, very capable and certainly very experienced in the practice of real estate law. So those are there's no small list of people here that are very capable. It's a long list of lawyers and paralegals that will have informed this process. Now, we don't know whether the recommendations and conclusions of the report are actually encapsulated within this legislation or not. We don't know what the government put in, what they left out. So we're going to have to ask a number of questions about that as well as we move forward in the adjourned debate process, Mr. Speaker. So of the 7 recommendations, they talk about underserved and unrecognized legal needs. I need to make a point, really, Mr. Speaker, about this government's reduction in the legal services people that work for legal aid here in Saskatchewan. As you know, a number of positions have been cut. There's been consolidations, much like we see with other agencies like the archives, and now they're talking about people who don't have access to the legal system. So I'm not really sure how you can suck and blow at the same time, Mr. Speaker. If people aren't being served, why are you cutting positions in the legal aid system? It just doesn't make any sense at all. And just creating a new layer of non-lawyer lawyers could raise some real concerns with providing legal knowledge to people who cannot afford a lawyer. But certainly there are areas that I know in real estate law in particular where there is a lot of information that could be provided to individuals when they're selling their home or purchasing their home and getting into mortgaging and financing that could be provided by paralegals, for example, Mr. Speaker, and I think if you check with any real estate practice, most of those practitioners would say that paralegals are extremely capable and competent in that area of law. So I think we have more questions than answers at this point in time, Mr. Speaker, and I know that my colleagues are going to want to check with their connections in the legal profession to make sure that this represents what the task force called for. So at this point, Mr. Speaker, I will adjourn debate on Bill number 163, an act to amend the Legal Profession Act 1990.
Members move to adjourn debate. It's a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Carried. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the committees may continue their good work. I move that this House do now adjourn.
It's been moved by the Government House Leader that the Assembly now adjourn. It's a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Carried. This Assembly now stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30 p.m.